She's sitting at her desk at work, scrolling through her phone during her lunch break, doing what she's done every single day for the past 5 years. She's checking her messages, looking for that one notification that has become as necessary to her as breathing, a call or text from her husband. But today, like the past 3 weeks, there's nothing. No missed calls, no text messages, no, "Hey, how's your day going?" No little moments of connection that have been the glue holding their relationship together. She stares at her phone screen, refreshing her messages over and over, as if the act of refreshing will somehow conjure a notification from him that isn't there. She thinks back to how things used to be, to the early days of their relationship when he would call her multiple times a day just to hear her voice. He would call her in the morning before work, during his lunch break, on his drive home, sometimes even late at night when he couldn't sleep and just wanted to talk to her about nothing in particular. These calls were never about anything important or urgent. They were just moments of connection, brief interruptions in their days that reminded them both that the other person existed and cared. She used to joke that he was obsessed with her, that he couldn't go more than a few hours without hearing her voice. He would laugh and say that she was right, that he was completely obsessed, that he couldn't imagine his day without at least one conversation with her. But somewhere along the way, the calls stopped coming. At first, she didn't notice because it happened gradually, not all at once. One week, he called 3 times instead of 4. The next week it was 2 times. Then it was just morning and evening, and eventually, even those calls became shorter and more perfunctory, like he was checking off a box on his to-do list rather than actually wanting to connect with her. She tried not to read too much into it, telling herself that this was normal, that relationships change over time, that the intensity of the early days naturally fades as couples settle into a more comfortable rhythm. But deep down, something in her was screaming that this wasn't just a natural evolution. This was something more, something darker, something that signaled a fundamental shift in how he felt about her. She decides to pay closer attention to the pattern of his behavior, to document when he calls, and when he doesn't, as if keeping a record will somehow help her understand what's happening. She starts a mental tally, noting that on Mondays he rarely calls, that on Wednesdays he sometimes calls from his car on the way home, that on Fridays he's usually too busy with end-of-week projects to reach out. She realizes that the spontaneity is completely gone, that there's no longer any element of surprise or excitement in their communication. She used to not know when he would call, used to be pleasantly interrupted by his voice coming through her phone at random moments throughout her day. Now she can predict almost exactly when he might reach out, and even those moments are becoming less and less frequent. She tries to tell herself that maybe this is just a phase he's going through at work, that maybe his job has gotten more demanding, and he's too focused on his career to think about calling her during the day. She knows that his company recently went through a major restructuring, that he was promoted to a new position with more responsibility, that he's been stressed about proving himself in this new role. She tells herself that his lack of calls doesn't necessarily mean anything about their relationship. It just means he's busy. It just means he's focused on work. It just means he cares about his career. But even as she tells herself these things, she doesn't really believe them because she knows her husband, and she knows that even when he's busy and stressed, he used to make time for her. One morning, she decides to test her theory by calling him herself, something she rarely does because she's always waited for him to reach out first. She tells herself that maybe if she initiates contact, it will prompt him to remember that he enjoys talking to her, that it will remind him of the connection they used to have. She calls him at 10 a.m., right in the middle of his workday, and she's genuinely surprised when he actually answers. For a moment, she feels a flutter of hope, thinking that maybe this will reignite something, that hearing his voice might help them reconnect. But he answers in a rushed, distracted tone, and within 30 seconds, he's telling her that he's in the middle of a meeting and can't really talk right now. She hears sounds in the background, people talking, laughter, the murmur of what sounds like a meeting happening. But something about the quality of his distraction bothers her, something about the urgency in his voice makes her suspicious. She asks him casually if he's in an important meeting, and he says yes, very important, and that he needs to call her back later. But later never comes, because she waits all day and he doesn't call her back, and by the time he gets home that evening, she's almost convinced herself that the meeting comment was a lie. She wonders if he was actually in a meeting at all, or if he just didn't want to talk to her, if her call had interrupted something he was doing that was more important than his wife. She doesn't mention the phone call when he gets home, doesn't want to seem needy or clingy by pointing out that he said he would call her back and didn't. Instead, she tries to act normal, to engage him in conversation about his day, to see if he volunteers any information about what he was doing when she called. But he's vague and non-committal, saying it was a busy day at work, that he's tired, that he wants to relax. He seems distant in a way that's becoming increasingly familiar, like he's physically present but emotionally absent, like his mind is somewhere else entirely. She wonders if there's another woman, if that's why he stopped calling her, if he's lost interest in her and has found someone else to give his attention to. Over the next week, she becomes increasingly preoccupied with the lack of communication between them. She finds herself checking her phone obsessively throughout the day, waiting for a call or text that doesn't come. She finds herself initiating text conversations with him, trying to engage him, trying to remind him that she exists and that she misses hearing from him. Sometimes he responds quickly, sometimes he takes hours. Sometimes his responses are warm and affectionate, and sometimes they're cold and perfunctory. The inconsistency is maddening because it keeps her off balance, never quite knowing what version of her husband she's going to get when he finally does respond to her. She starts researching online, Googling things like husband stop calling during the day, and signs your husband is losing interest, and how to know if your husband is having an affair. She reads article after article, forum post after forum post, stories from women whose marriages ended because their husbands stopped showing interest in them, stories of infidelity and emotional disconnection that started exactly the way hers did, with the cessation of those small, daily moments of connection. She reads about warning signs like withdrawn behavior, lack of physical affection, increased time spent away from home, and secretive behavior with phones and computers. She's checking off boxes mentally, wondering how many of these warning signs she's actually observing in her husband. She decides to do something she's never done before. She decides to follow him one day after work, to see if he goes somewhere other than home, to see if he stops somewhere to meet someone. She feels guilty as she makes this decision, feels like she's crossing some kind of line into invasion of privacy and distrust. But the need to know, the desperate desire to understand what's happening in their marriage, outweighs her guilt. She texts him that she's working late and won't be home until after 8 p.m., giving herself time to follow him without him knowing. She parks her car near his office building and waits for him to emerge at the end of the workday. When she sees him walk out of the building, she's struck by how normal he looks, how exactly the same as he always is. She half expects him to look different somehow, to show some visible sign of whatever is happening beneath the surface of their marriage. But he doesn't. He just looks tired and a little sad, in a way that makes her heart ache. She follows him as he walks to his car, and she watches as he gets in and drives away. She follows him through the city streets, keeping a safe distance, her heart pounding in her chest as she wonders what's about to be revealed. She expects him to drive to a hotel, to an apartment, to a restaurant where he's meeting someone. But instead, he drives to the local park. She watches as he parks his car and gets out, walking toward a bench near the pond. He sits down on the bench and just sits there, staring out at the water. He doesn't pull out his phone to text anyone. He doesn't meet anyone. He just sits there, completely alone, and he looks deeply, profoundly sad. She watches him from a distance, hidden behind a tree, watching her husband sit alone on a bench, looking like he's carrying the weight of the entire world on his shoulders. She watches for nearly 20 minutes as he just sits there, occasionally running his hand through his hair, occasionally shifting his weight, but mostly just staring at the water with an expression of complete despair on his face. She feels her suspicions crumble in that moment, replaced by a wave of concern and worry for her husband. Whatever is happening, it's not an affair. She can see that in his posture, in his expression, in the loneliness that radiates from him like a physical force. Something is very wrong with him, and instead of talking to her about it, instead of reaching out to her for support, he's been retreating into himself, isolating himself, carrying whatever this burden is completely alone. She realizes that his lack of calls isn't about losing interest in her, it's about him struggling with something so significant that he's pulled away from everyone, including her. She waits until he gets up from the bench and returns to his car before she gets in her own car and drives away. She doesn't follow him home. She doesn't confront him about following him to the park. Instead, she drives around for a while, processing what she's just witnessed, trying to figure out how to approach this with him. She realizes that demanding answers about his behavior isn't going to work, that confronting him about following him to the park will just make him defensive and more withdrawn. She needs to approach this differently, with compassion and patience, with an understanding that whatever he's going through, he's struggling to handle it alone. When he gets home that night, she approaches him differently than she has been. Instead of trying to get him to engage with her, instead of waiting for him to call her or text her, instead of trying to force connection, she simply tells him that she's noticed he seems sad lately, that he seems like he has something on his mind, and that she's here for him if he wants to talk. She watches as his face crumbles, as tears form in his eyes, as he struggles to maintain his composure. He tells her that he's sorry, that he knows he's been distant, that he doesn't know how to explain what he's been going through. He tells her that he's been depressed, that he's been struggling with anxiety, that he's been feeling completely lost and overwhelmed by life. He tells her that he didn't know how to talk to her about it, that he didn't want to burden her with his problems, that he thought he could just handle it on his own, and that things would get better. He tells her that the lack of calls wasn't about not caring about her. It was about him being in such a dark place that he didn't know how to be present for anyone, even the person he loves most. He tells her that not calling her was actually one of the ways his depression was manifesting, that he felt unworthy of her love, that he felt like she deserved someone better, someone who wasn't broken and struggling. He tells her that withdrawing from her was a form of self-sabotage, a way of punishing himself because he believed he deserved to be alone. She listens to him talk about his depression and anxiety with a mixture of relief and heartbreak. Relief that there's no affair, that his distance isn't about losing interest in her, that his silence isn't about another woman. But heartbreak that he's been struggling this much, that he's been carrying this alone, that he didn't feel like he could reach out to her for help. She asks him how long he's been feeling this way, and he tells her that it started about 4 months ago, that it began with stress at work and gradually spiraled into something much bigger, something that started affecting every aspect of his life. He tells her that he's been having dark thoughts, that he's been wondering if life is even worth living, that he's felt like a burden to everyone around him. She feels a chill run down her spine at his admission, realizing how serious this is, realizing that his distance and withdrawal might be signs of something that could be life-threatening. She asks him if he's thought about hurting himself, and he admits that he has, that he's had suicidal ideation, that he's been thinking about ways he could end his pain permanently. She feels panic rising in her throat as she realizes that the man she loves has been contemplating ending his life, and she's been so focused on her own hurt feelings about his lack of calls that she missed the signs of a serious mental health crisis. She immediately tells him that they need to get him help, that he needs to see a therapist, that they need to address this together as a team. He's resistant at first, telling her that therapy won't help, that nothing will help, that he's just broken, and there's nothing anyone can do to fix him. But she's firm with him, telling him that she doesn't care how broken he feels. She's not going to lose him. She's not going to let him give up on their marriage and their life together. She tells him that they're going to find him professional help, that they're going to face this together, that his life has value and meaning, and that she loves him too much to watch him suffer alone. She calls his doctor the next day and explains the situation, and within a week, he has an appointment with a psychiatrist and a therapist who specializes in depression and anxiety. The first few weeks of therapy are difficult, with her husband having to confront thoughts and feelings that he's been pushing down for months. He's prescribed medication to help manage his depression, and it takes time for the medication to start working, for him to start feeling even slightly better. But slowly, gradually, over the course of several weeks, she begins to see small changes in him. He seems slightly less heavy, slightly less burdened, slightly more present. The calls start coming back, first just one a day, then sometimes 2. They're not the spontaneous, frequent calls they used to be, but there's something. They're a sign that he's beginning to re-engage with life and with her. As his mental health begins to improve, they start having deeper conversations about what he experienced, about the root causes of his depression, about what led him to feel so hopeless and desperate. He tells her about the perfectionism that has driven him his entire life, about the pressure he puts on himself to succeed, about the way he defines his worth through his accomplishments. He tells her that when a major project at work failed, when he wasn't promoted as he expected to be, it triggered a cascade of negative thoughts and beliefs about his value and his worth. He tells her that he started believing that he'd failed her, that he'd failed his family, that he was a failure as a person. She listens to him share these thoughts and feelings with compassion and understanding, realizing that his depression wasn't about her, wasn't about their relationship, wasn't about any external factor that she could control. It was about internal struggles that he'd been dealing with his entire life, struggles with perfectionism and self-worth and the pressure to be perfect. She realizes that by withdrawing his calls, by isolating himself, he was actually engaging in a form of self-punishment, a way of confirming his belief that he didn't deserve love, that he didn't deserve connection, that he deserved to be alone. She tells him that he needs to learn to treat himself with kindness, that he needs to let go of the perfectionism that's been driving him his entire life, that he deserves to be happy and healthy. As the months pass and his treatment continues, his mental health gradually improves. The calls come back more frequently. The connection between them deepens. He becomes more engaged with life, more interested in things outside of work, more present in their relationship. She sees him slowly begin to believe that he has value, that he deserves love, that he's worthy of happiness. She watches as he laughs more, as the sadness that had taken over his face begins to lift, as he starts to look more like the man she married, the man she fell in love with, the man who used to call her multiple times a day just to hear her voice. One day, about 6 months into his treatment, he calls her at work at exactly 11 a.m., the way he used to do years ago. It's a spontaneous call, not prompted by anything in particular, just him wanting to hear her voice in the middle of his workday. She answers and hears the warmth in his voice, hears the genuine happiness in his tone, and she feels tears starting to form in her eyes. He tells her that he was sitting at his desk, and he thought about her and how much she means to him, and he just had to call. He tells her that he's been thinking about how she never gave up on him, how she saw through his withdrawal and recognized it as a sign that something was wrong, how she forced him to get help when he didn't want help. He tells her that she saved his life. She tells him that she's proud of him, that she's grateful he's getting better, that she's grateful they didn't lose each other in the darkness of his depression. She tells him that she loves him, that she's always going to be there for him, that whatever challenges lie ahead, they'll face them together. The call is brief, maybe 3 minutes, but it feels significant because it's the first time in months that he's called her just because he wanted to, not because it was expected or because he felt obligated, but because he genuinely wanted to share a moment with her. After they hang up, she sits at her desk with tears streaming down her face, feeling a sense of gratitude and hope that she thought she'd lost. The therapy sessions continue, and he becomes increasingly open about his mental health journey. He starts reading books about depression and anxiety, about perfectionism and self-worth, about building resilience and learning to be kind to himself. He joins a support group for men dealing with depression, and he finds it incredibly helpful to talk to other men who have experienced similar struggles, who understand what it's like to be male and depressed in a society that often stigmatizes mental health struggles. He starts exercising regularly, something he'd stopped doing when his depression was at its worst. He starts eating healthier, sleeping better, developing habits that support his mental health rather than undermine it. She watches this transformation with amazement, seeing her husband not just recover from depression but actually grow beyond it, actually use the experience as a catalyst for personal development and growth. She sees him becoming more self-aware, more compassionate toward himself, more willing to be vulnerable with people he trusts. She sees him understanding that strength isn't about never struggling, never feeling weak, never needing help. It's about facing your struggles head-on, about admitting when you need help, about being willing to be vulnerable enough to let people close to you see your pain. One evening, they're sitting on their back porch watching the sunset, and he takes her hand and tells her something that he's been working on with his therapist. He tells her that he wants to be more present in their relationship, that he wants to rebuild the connection that was damaged by his withdrawal, that he wants to be intentional about spending time with her and showing her that she matters to him. He tells her that they should have a daily phone call, not because it's expected, but because he wants to. He tells her that he wants to plan dates with her, that he wants to spend time with her without his phone or work distracting him, that he wants to rebuild the intimacy that had faded over the years. She tells him that she would love that she's been missing the connection they had, that she's grateful that he's not only recovering from depression, but also willing to invest in their relationship. They start having daily phone calls again, but this time it's different than it was at the beginning of their relationship. The calls are more intentional, more meaningful, more grounded in a deeper understanding of each other. They talk about real things, about feelings and fears and hopes and dreams, not just surface-level updates about their days. They plan weekly date nights and actually stick to them, putting their phones away and giving each other their full attention. They also have difficult conversations about how his depression affected her, about how she felt when he withdrew, about how scary it was to realize that the man she loved was contemplating suicide. He listens to her without getting defensive, understanding that his withdrawal, while it came from a place of depression, still had an impact on her. He apologizes for making her feel abandoned, for not letting her in, for forcing her to figure out on her own what was happening to him. She accepts his apology and tells him that she forgives him, that she understands that his depression was a disease, not a choice, but that she's grateful they're talking about it now, working through it together. As a year passes since he started treatment, they both notice that his mental health has stabilized in a way that feels sustainable. He's no longer having suicidal thoughts. He's no longer feeling the crushing weight of depression that had dominated his life. He's on medication that works for him. He has a therapist he trusts. He has a support group that understands what he's going through, and he has a wife who loves him and supports him. The combination of these things has created a foundation that allows him to function, to thrive, to actually enjoy his life again. He tells her that he feels like he's been given a second chance, like he's been pulled back from the edge of a cliff, and he's determined to make the most of this second chance. They decide to use this experience as a catalyst for positive change in their lives. They start volunteering for a mental health organization, helping to raise awareness about depression and anxiety, sharing their story with others. They give talks to corporate groups about mental health in the workplace, about how depression affects productivity and relationships, about the importance of creating spaces where people feel safe enough to disclose their struggles. They start a blog documenting their journey, and it begins to gain a following of people who are also dealing with depression, also struggling, also looking for hope and guidance. The calls come back even more frequently now, no longer just 1 or 2 a day, but multiple times throughout the day, brief moments of connection where they check in with each other, share something funny they saw, or just listen to each other breathe on the phone for a moment. These calls have become a ritual that they both look forward to, moments in their day that ground them, that remind them that they're not alone, that they have someone in their corner. She notices that her husband has changed from someone who is withdrawing into depression to someone who is actively seeking connection, who is reaching out, who is investing in relationships that matter to him. One day, about 18 months after he started treatment, he comes home with a proposal. He wants to take a 2-week vacation where they leave their phones behind, where they disconnect from work and technology, where they focus entirely on reconnecting and rebuilding their relationship. They plan a trip to a remote cabin in the mountains where they'll have no cell service, no internet, no distractions. They'll have nothing but each other, the natural world, and time to reflect on their journey and their future. She's excited and nervous about it simultaneously. Excited because she wants this reconnection, nervous because being completely unplugged from the outside world is intimidating. When they arrive at the cabin, she's struck by the quietness, by the absence of phones buzzing, by the peacefulness of being completely disconnected. They spend their days hiking through forests, sitting by a lake, reading books on the porch, cooking meals together, talking for hours about everything and nothing. There are no phone calls to interrupt them, no text messages, pulling their attention away from each other. They exist in a bubble of pure connection and presence that feels both sacred and healing. On their final night at the cabin, he takes her hand and tells her that this trip has been exactly what he needed, that being away from all the noise and distractions has helped him see clearly what matters most in life. Her, their relationship, the connection between them. He tells her that he's realized that depression tried to convince him that he wasn't worthy of love, that he was a burden, that she would be better off without him. But being here with her, being reminded of how much she loves him, being reminded of how they support each other through life's challenges, has reinforced the truth that he is worthy of love, that his life has value and meaning, that their relationship is one of the most important things in his life. He tells her that he wants to spend the rest of his life showing her how much she means to him, that he wants to make sure she never doubts how much he loves her, that he wants to be present and engaged in their relationship every single day. When they return home, their relationship feels different, feels stronger, feels like it's been rebuilt on a more solid foundation. They continue therapy, continue the daily calls, continue the weekly date nights. They've learned that maintaining a healthy relationship requires intentionality, requires effort, requires choosing each other even when life gets busy and stressful. They've learned that communication is the foundation of everything, that opening up about struggles isn't weakness but rather the ultimate sign of trust and love. They've learned that mental health is not a personal failing but rather a legitimate health concern that deserves professional attention and care. 2 years after he started treatment, they decide to share their story publicly in a larger way. They write a book about their experience, about his depression and her discovery that something was wrong, about their journey through therapy and healing. The book becomes more successful than they ever imagined, resonating with thousands of people who have had similar experiences, who have either struggled with depression themselves or have loved someone who has. They start getting emails from people thanking them for sharing their story, telling them that reading about their journey gave them hope, gave them the courage to seek help, gave them permission to be vulnerable. She realizes that the crisis in their marriage, as painful as it was, has actually led to something beautiful and meaningful. Their willingness to face the problem head-on, their commitment to working through it together, their openness to sharing their story has helped countless other people. She thinks about what would have happened if she just accepted his explanations about why he wasn't calling, if she just assumed he was losing interest in her and given up on the marriage. She realizes that her instinct to dig deeper, to try to understand what was really going on, to push him to get help, was the best decision she could have made. Her husband tells her one day that he owes her his life, that if she hadn't noticed his withdrawal, if she hadn't confronted him with compassion, if she hadn't pushed him to get help, he might not be here today. He tells her that his depression had convinced him that the world would be better off without him, that she would be better off without him. But her refusal to accept his withdrawal, her willingness to see through his depression to the person she loved underneath it all, gave him a reason to stay, gave him hope that things could get better, gave him the foundation of support he needed to heal. She tells him that she loves him, that she's grateful he's alive, that she's grateful every single day for the choice he made to get help and to fight through his depression. She tells him that their story is proof that even when things feel hopeless, even when depression convinces you that you're worthless and burdensome, there is always hope, there is always the possibility of healing, there is always the possibility of rebuilding and finding meaning and connection. She tells him that their relationship is stronger now than it's ever been, not despite everything they've been through, but because of it. Years pass, and their life continues to evolve and grow. They have children, and they raise them with an understanding of mental health and emotional well-being that comes from their lived experience. They teach their children that it's okay to struggle, that it's okay to ask for help, that vulnerability is a sign of strength. They model healthy communication and emotional expression, showing their children that feelings matter and that talking about those feelings is important. They continue therapy, not because there's something wrong, but because they believe in ongoing personal growth and self-awareness. One day, their daughter comes home from school and tells them that one of her friends is struggling with anxiety, that the friend is scared to talk to her parents about it. Their daughter remembers the stories her parents have told about her father's depression, and she encourages her friend to talk to her parents, to seek help, to understand that mental health struggles are treatable. The friend has talked to her parents, and she gets help, and she begins to feel better. When their daughter tells them the story, they both cry, realizing that by sharing their journey, they've not only healed themselves but have also created ripples of healing that extend to people they've never even met. She thinks back to that moment when she was sitting at her desk at work, refreshing her phone, waiting for a call that didn't come. She thinks about how that moment of worry and confusion and suspicion led her down a path of investigation and discovery that ultimately saved her husband's life. She thinks about how the worst moment of their relationship, the moment when she thought he was losing interest in her, was actually the beginning of their deepest healing and growth. She realizes that sometimes what feels like the end is actually a new beginning, that sometimes what feels like a crisis is actually an opportunity for transformation. She watches her husband now, years later, and she sees a man who is present, who is engaged, who is connected to life and to her in a way that he struggled to be before. She sees a man who calls her during the day because he wants to, because he enjoys talking to her, because he values their connection. She sees a man who has learned to prioritize his mental health, who has learned to be vulnerable, who has learned to ask for help when he needs it. She sees a man who has learned to be kind to himself, who has learned to let go of perfectionism, who has learned that his worth is not determined by his accomplishments, but by who he is as a person. And when he calls her during the day now, it means something different than it used to. It's not just about maintaining connection. It's about celebrating the fact that they made it through the darkness, that they chose each other even when things were hard, that they refused to give up on their relationship even when it felt easier to walk away. Each call is a small victory, a reminder that they're still here, they're still fighting, they're still choosing each other every single day. And she answers each call with gratitude, with love, with the knowledge that these simple moments of connection are actually the most important things in their life.